Welcome to the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm Nate Hedrick.
And I'm David Bright. We're both pharmacists and real estate investors that believe that real estate investing does not have to distract from a meaningful career in pharmacy.
Each episode, we share stories that educate and inspire pharmacists to leverage real estate investing as a part of your financial plan. Hey, David, how's it going?
Hey, good, thanks. How you doing, man?
Good, although it's been a bit of a crazy week/weekend with everything going on. But that's what we're here to talk about today, right?
Yeah, I know we were like texting all weekend after this National Association of Realtors news broke with, there's a bunch of stories out there. So I was texting you of like, what's actually going on since you're a realtor? And I figure if I'm texting you for this kind of stuff, that's, I'm guessing that other people are wondering as they're reading all these headlines of this settlement that's coming out, like what's actually going on, especially because some people are saying the sky is falling. Some people are saying the real estate market will never be the same. There's an impending crash coming. Like I've heard all kinds of stuff the last couple of days.
Yeah, if you're on any sort of media, social or otherwise, it's kind of everywhere right now. Obviously, the news cycle is quick, though. I'm sure by the time this goes live, it will already be a thing of the past, right? But it has been blowing up quite a bit over the weekend, and it's relevant to a lot of our audience, relevant to investors, to home buyers. I mean, just about everybody.
Yeah. And one of the things that we were texting about and that we thought would be helpful to talk about is just to bring some context to this discussion, because one of the things that we thought is this isn't going to shake out quickly. It's not like in a week we're going to know what the new normal is. Like this is going to take a minute to settle out. So particularly knowing that you bring a different perspective than I do, you're obviously a realtor. You've got a very firm grasp on what realtors do in the modern era of buying and selling and all that. And I'm actively working on buying and selling a few different houses right now. In fact, we just closed on the purchase of a house we're hoping to flip just the day before this settlement broke. So I don't know if I should be kicking myself or happy that I got that done right before the settlement. So, but between the two of us, I figure we'll hopefully lay some context today.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think, again, there's a lot of information out there. And so hopefully we can give you just some of the facts rather than some of the opinions, and just kind of give you some of the information that you might need so that you can watch things going forward with us and see where everything's going to shake out.
Yeah. Yeah. So Nate, I know you've been following this closely. I know you've talked about meetings and stories and everything that you're reading. So I was hoping you could just, from a pharmacist real estate investor standpoint, just can you zoom out and give us a 30,000-foot view of the settlements that happened a few months ago, as well as the settlement that happened in early March 2024?
Yes, and I'll try to give you the quickest version of this that I can, but it helps to start with how real estate agents get paid. If you're not aware, real estate agents, realtors are paid on commission, right? They get a percentage of the home sale that gets paid to a broker, and then the agent themselves actually gets a chunk of that. Typically, that money comes from the proceeds of the sale and is paid by the seller. So what has typically happened in the past is that when you're listing a property, part of the listing agreement is to determine how much commission is going to go toward the listing agent and their broker, and how much money is going to go toward the buying agent and their broker. And that's written up as the property is being listed, and then it's advertised as part of the listing on the MLS, on Zillow, on Realtor.com. All of those things have access to that sort of advertised price. Well, again, several years ago and throughout the past couple of years, there have been some lawsuits basically against the National Association of Realtors, saying that this is essentially price fixing, that the NAR and their agents, meaning every agent in the country, has basically been saying, well, you have to provide this compensation to the buyer. You don't have any choice, and that the allegation is that they were colluding to basically fix that price, right? So price fixing is a big deal, and that was the allegation that the National Association of Realtors was basically saying you had to set it at 6% or whatever the number was, and you have to pay the seller and you have to pay the buyer and so on, and didn't give basically people the choice of setting that commission or not. And so that lawsuit has been ongoing. It's been sort of a crazy fight back and forth about where everything stands. And what happened on Friday, the 16th, is that the 15th, excuse me. What happened on Friday, the 15th, is that the NAR decided to settle. Now, as of this recording, that settlement has not been approved by the court. That's an important factor too, that this is just what the NRR said they would do. It doesn't mean that the court has approved that settlement. But what they said is that we are not admitting any wrongdoing. We're not saying we price colluded, but we're agreeing to settle to stop this lawsuit. We're going to pay out a whole bunch of money, $418 million. And we're going to make some big changes. And we'll dive into those changes in a moment, but basically saying, we're not saying we did anything wrong, but we'd like to stop being in this lawsuit. So we're agreeing to bow out, basically. And so that is the most condensed version of events that have led up to where we are right now.
Okay, and with that price fixing, this 6% seems very common, where the agent on the one side gets 3%, the agent on the other side gets 3%. I think that those of us that have bought or sold a house have probably seen that on a settlement statement somewhere about that 3%. Sometimes it's a little different, right? There are scenarios where investors that are doing high volume may negotiate with a realtor to work at a lower rate. There may be a lower rate at a higher price point. Like there's different things that may exist in different markets, but the 6% is obviously common. So one of the things that I've heard kicked around is, well, if there's now going to be competition in this space, does that mean that 6% is going to turn into 5 or 4 or 3, or is this going to save people money? Is this going to cost people money, or how does that all start to look?
Yeah, potentially, and it helps to get into some of the details of what the NAR has agreed to do as part of that settlement. And I guess I'll start here too. That 6/5/4, whatever that's
Hmm.
always been negotiable.
Hmm.
I think the industry sort of standard has kind of been there, and that's just been the way to sort of lead these discussions. But it's always been negotiable. In fact, when we talk with our clients, it's always a question of like, well, we'd like to list your house. Here's all the things that we're going to do for you, so on and so forth. Kind of give them the value proposition, and then say, and we'd like to charge you this percentage. What do you think about that, right? And we kind of have a conversation about it, and try to back up the work that we're going to do with the price that we're charging to do it, right? But
Right.
what the NAR has basically said is that, well, going forward, especially on the buyer side, because again, what the allegation was is that the sellers felt like they didn't have a choice on offering the buyer's side a commission. And so what the NAR said they're going to do is that no agents will no longer be able to advertise a buyer's commission on the MLS or anywhere really. I take that back. They can put it on their own internal brokerage website, but any of the public domain websites, basically, they're not allowed to put up 3% for a buyer's agent, bringing them to the table. And so there's a lot of question about what that's going to do in terms of driving down commissions or keeping them the same or making them more obscure. Like, what is that going to look like going forward?
Yeah, and I'm used to seeing that, especially on the seller side. I see the two commissions going out on the settlement statement at the end, and then I've always been told when I work with a buyer's agent, it's free to me, right? Like I've heard things like that in conversation, so that I don't have to, like, if particularly if first time home buyer. When I had never done this before, when I went out with an agent, it wasn't like that first meeting I had to put a check in their hand or anything like that. Like they would take me out and show me houses, and that was in good faith that we would hopefully eventually close something and that agent would get paid. So are you expecting a business model where in order to be a buyer, they may have to make some sort of direct payment, or that could all look very different now?
Yeah, I mean, so you're spot on, right? Because what you said about, I know at some point there's going to be a payday,
Hmm.
right? That's because the sellers were basically, everyone was offering this. It would be very strange, going back in the last, since the 1990s, for there not to be a buyer's commission advertised. And so if I'm an agent and I'm starting to work with buyers, even if they're maybe not that serious, even if they might be working with another agent, there's still that prospect of like, hey, if I can get them to the point of getting an offer, if I can, attach them to myself as a client, I, if I can just get to the table, eventually there'll be some sort of deal and I'll get some sort of payment, right? But now, if that is no longer a guarantee, buyers agents are going to have some sort of agreement in place that says, look, I I don't like to work for free, so I need to
Yeah.
have some sort of compensation. I got to build this in up front. Now, whether I don't think there'll be any situation where the buyer will have to pay that to the agent up front. I think it'll still be done as part of closing. I just think
Okay.
it'll be a much more obvious part of closing costs. And the question of where that's going to come from is a big one, because the three people in that transaction that can pay for it are the seller, right? The
Hmm.
proceeds from the sale of their property,
Hmm.
which is how it's always been done. The buyer, the person coming to the table who is already struggling with finding a down payment and closing costs and everything else that goes with it, or the lender, right? The lender is the one that's providing all the funds for the mortgage. Maybe there's an opportunity for them to bring additional funds to the table to satisfy that buyer side of the equation. But it's a big question on where that funding is going to come from in the future.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking as you're mentioning lender and seller, those would essentially mean that the buyer is rolling those costs into the loan, right? Because
Yep.
if those costs are what go out, and so I'm thinking that if they're not able to do that, this could be particularly difficult for the maybe first time home buyer or someone that's looking to bring in a low down payment purchase, like if they're looking at 5% conventional or an FHA or a VA or something like that, where they're trying to buy with very, very little down, that just feels difficult.
Yeah, and today's regulations don't allow, especially if you're like an FHA, VA, USDA, yeah, government-backed
Hmm.
buyer. Those loan products do not allow the lenders to contribute toward commissions. That you just it's not part of it. You can't bake those in, right? So it's going to be a bit of a challenge unless we can get that changed in some way.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's definitely interesting, particularly for the low down payment scenarios. What about the sticker price and the total cost in the equation? You know, if I'm a seller listing a $200,000 house, do you think that this change is going to cause sellers to start listing properties lower or drive down housing prices? Because I've seen that as one goal of this is maybe housing prices may come down from this.
Maybe, right? So a big maybe. I think so. If we take the scenario a step at a time, I think it'll start to illustrate just how complicated this is. So if you've got again the seller that's listing a house at 200,000, or 3 months ago they were going to list it at 200,000. If you tell them that they have to pay 3% less commission, right? They can list it for 3% instead of six. Are they going to list the house for 3% less, or are they going to list it at 200,000? Right? Just about every
Yeah,
seller out there is going to try to push that price as much as they can, right? But if
absolutely.
the why wouldn't you? But the natural question is, well, then, okay, is it now actually overinflating the price? Because not only does the buyer have to come up with the exact same amount they were coming up with before, they have to find another 3% to pay for their own listing or their own buying agent. Or are they going to go in unrepresented, or are they going to have to negotiate down the price to basically cover their costs of that buying agent? Like, where's that going to go? I don't think you're going to get a situation where a bunch of agents are going to start working for free. So
Right.
I see the only options there become, either very, very discount buying agents, which I think is a difficult road to follow, or prices have to come down in some capacity to basically accommodate that extra payment that the buyers have got to come up with.
Yeah, and that makes me think because you mentioned someone going in unrepresented, which in our
Mhm.
world means as a buyer you don't have an agent. We've talked for many episodes about for sale by owners, and that's relatively common. But with this theory that I don't pay anything to the buyer's agent as the buyer, the seller has to take care of that. It's free to me. There's not a lot of people that go out there and try to be unrepresented buyers, right? Do you think that that may start to become a thing if people perceive that they're not going to be able to pay for a buyer's realtor?
Perhaps, right? I think if you've got the experience and the understanding of everything from negotiations to inspections to contracts to the loan processing and the title processing. Like if you know all that stuff, if you bought and sold multiple investment properties, let's say, or have worked as a real estate agent in the past, you might know that stuff inside and out. And yeah, it might actually be in your benefit to come up unrepresented, and then you can go to that seller and say, "Look, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just going to come buy this house. I don't need an agent. These are the contracts and so on." Um, I think that's going to be really tough for first time home buyers or people with less experience. I think there's a ton of value. And again, I'm admittedly super
Hmm.
biased, right? Like as an,
Hmm.
as an agent that works a lot with buyer agents, I think we bring a lot of value to that equation. It's difficult though at times to convince people of that, right? If you hop on Zillow, you can see every house that's available. And I think a lot of people assume that our job sort of stops at finding you a house. And so I think that's going to be a tough piece to help establish.
Yeah, if people perceive the Zillow app to be like the eBay app where they just find a house, click buy it now, right? If they think that's as easy it is, I could see a scenario where buyers think this is so easy I could do it myself, particularly if they are first timers and don't have context for all of the complexity in the process. So I
Yeah.
feel like there's probably something in the real estate investor space where there's folks that have bought a few houses and may understand that, yeah, I really do need help because this gets really complicated in a hurry, and especially when a situation gets really hairy. And then there may be investors that are thinking, I've done this many times now. Maybe I should think about being unrepresented, or maybe I should think about getting a real estate license myself. And I know since you've made that jump, what would you advise people that are thinking about either going in unrepresented or getting their own real estate license?
Oh man. I get caveat, right? Not a lawyer, not financial, not financial advice. I should have probably said that like 10 more times. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be a tough time in the next 6 to 9 months to be a new agent. I think again, if you have the experience and the know-how, I could see where going in unrepresented might be beneficial. I will tell you that even if knowing what I know, right? Like I've bought a lot of properties, helped with tons and tons of transactions. I still like having the backing of a brokerage behind me when making an offer. I will tell you, I never go in unrepresented. Again, I am an agent, obviously, so I have
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
brokerage behind me no matter what, but I never go in unrepresented. I'm always listing myself as an agent, which again, we have to disclose anyway, but I'm doing it through the brokerage because it adds that extra layer of protection. I have the full backing of my brokerage when I'm making an offer. And like you said, if something goes south or gets hairy, I want to have that protection of a bigger entity than me helping me out with that rather than just Nate showing up and putting an offer on a property. So I could see more people wanting to do it. I think that there's certainly going to be people out there that get burned by doing that, but there's an advantage there too if you don't mind the extra risk.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think. Pharmacists don't love risk, right? Like we talk about that often. And so when you say if you're okay with that extra risk, I think a lot of people just got really nervous when you said that. So I'm even thinking out loud. If someone was to get an attorney on their team to help
Mm.
with this process, there's probably other ways to mitigate that risk, but depending on the price point, it may be just as expensive or even more expensive to get an attorney on your team to review all these things versus a realtor on your team to review. And I know that that's very apples and oranges, but even just from understanding the contract language out there, that you can probably recite this stuff forwards and backwards of what section and paragraph things are in, right? So the familiarity that a realtor brings to the contract piece of it and all of those details.
Yeah, and a lot of that's you're certainly paying for that work. I would argue that if you asked a lawyer for the amount of time that an agent spends on an average transaction, you're going to be paying a whole lot more, just because the hourly rate there is just so crazy, and the amount of work that we put in basically is just part of the general transaction, answering
Mhm.
questions, going through contract language, and then letting the lawyer kind of sign everything at the end. It's a bit of a different story.
Yeah. Then if we go back to everything is negotiable now, where it didn't used to be, I
Mhm.
could also see the scenario where different realtors start offering up their services at different rates. And so you may see kind of rookie agents offering a lower rate than an experienced agent, or you may say that, I'll list your house and I will put it on the MLS for this, or I will list it and I will stage it and do professional photos, and we'll have a drone and we'll have all these things that, like, you know, if and you'll pay more. I could see it almost becoming this kind of spectrum of services and rates. Like, who knows what could materialize from that? But do you feel like there's any of this you get what you pay for in the realtor space, or is price not necessarily associated with value in the end? Or how would you discern that as a buyer
So
or
I
seller?
actually do think that this is first of all that's always been there, right? Like there's always been the option of negotiating these things and paying
Hmm.
a bit more for a more hands-off model. I mean, I've seen agents out there that are listing agents who charge top tier commissions, but they have a moving company that comes for free with the
Right.
process. They have,
Right.
like you said, all the high quality photos. They're putting out like high color glossy books. Usually these are for like the very very high end listings,
Hmm.
but you're paying a premium for that, right? So that's still there. Where I think it will be interesting is I think you'll see a shift where these agents that in the past could get licensed very easily, right? Very low barrier to entry,
Hmm.
and knew there was a guaranteed payday on the other end of a transaction, and basically were just doing whatever they could do to get through it. I think those agents will become fewer and far between, because it's going to be a heck of a battle if you're a newer or inexperienced agent to convince a buyer, especially a buyer, that I bring value to this equation, right? That my experience is worth something. Because in the past, you're right. You could essentially go to those people and say, "Look, I'm free, and I've got a broker behind me and a team behind me, and I'm not going to cost you anything," is what people used to
Hmm.
say. And that no longer is the case. I think that's going to be an interesting piece with, especially with newer, more inexperienced agents.
Yeah, I think we've already seen headwinds in the market where the transaction volume is way down from a few
Way
years
down.
ago. So, and the number of realtors is way up, right? So, if there's fewer deals per realtor, which is also disproportionate, right? They are the big name realtors in any area that are going to drive a lot of traffic. And there's a few folks that are just closing a few deals every year. So,
Yep.
this seems like it's going to get harder for the lower volume agent or the new agent in the process if they're trying to make a living out of it. Maybe different if you're an investor just doing your own deals, but
Mhm.
if you're trying to make a living at it, that sounds tough.
Yeah, I can even see a world where if you've got someone that's really high power, right, like very, very high volume, let's say they're doing 100 transactions a year, or better yet, let's say they're doing 100 listings a year and then running
Hmm.
maybe 20 buyers, they might look at it and say, look, this is an economy of scale. This is a game of scale. I'll run all my buyers for free. I'll ask for nothing in terms of commission, and I'll just wait for all the listings to show up, and then I'll make the money on those instead. I could completely see that world happening.
Yeah, I can see that particularly if you're helping those buyers find a house and then as
Right.
part of that deal, I get your listing,
Hmm.
then yeah, that could definitely be a model. Or even I'll help you buy and I won't charge anything, but then I'll list and I'll take 4% or something,
Sure.
charge a premium on the listing on the back end so that people can buy that second house at a lower down payment or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what shakes out of this. I think that what I hope doesn't happen, right? Because I think if you go take a zoomed out look, right, the entity that first started this lawsuit is like a consumer advocacy group, right? They're trying to benefit consumers, and what I worry about is that in this transaction, the person with the money basically is the seller, the person who has held that house for a certain number of years. They've benefited from appreciation, and now they have some extra capital in that transaction. The person who doesn't have extra capital most often is the buyer, and I just
Mhm.
hope that buyers don't get dinged by this, because they're either not going to get represented in the way that they should be, or they're going to have to come up with extra funds when they're already struggling to make ends meet and make these down payments happen. So I, I'm eager to see how we can make this work in a way that doesn't harm those buyers.
Yeah, I know that investors tend to be better at dealing with the emotional
Mhm.
side of things, but with your realtor hat on, I can imagine too that you've seen buyers that have been so excited, they're willing to overpay and they don't care. They just, I have to have that house, right? And I know that as an investor, I've been guilty of that too. I've walked through a house, I've been like, this would be an awesome investment. And I try, and I've had a really good realtor beside me say, calm down, David. You need to pay attention. You need to take a deep breath. And so that's where too I worry that buyers could, without someone kind of having their back right there, may overpay, and this could, the consumer advocacy side could really backfire.
Yeah, I really hope that doesn't happen. I think that there's risk of that. I think that good agents that are out there are going to try to prevent things like that, but
Mhm.
it's going to be a bit of a battle for that for a while.
Yeah. So I know I mentioned a minute ago we just bought a house like right before this all happened. Should I be scared or should I feel like we're going to see things start to crash, or where do you think this is? Do you think this is going to impact the market substantially in the next few months?
No, I think it'll take its. I think it'll take its time, right? So we're not even at the point yet where the settlement has been approved, right? So we are just days away. as we're recording this. And a lot more information is going to be coming out here in the next couple of months. This settlement is not meant to go into effect until at least July anyway. So we've got, again, some time before any of this transpires and really makes a big change. And I really don't think it's going to have a dramatic upfront effect. I think we won't know the true effects of this until a few months even after that, when we start to see how the prices are affected, how it affects the buyer pool, how it affects sellers, things like that. I think that's when you'll know more about how this might be affecting the market in general.
Okay. So does that mean that if you have an investor that's sitting there and they're like, I don't know if I should get in now, should I wait? Should I definitely jump? Would you advise an investor client that go ahead, jump on in? This isn't really going to shake anything up too bad. As long as you're measured and looking for a good deal is a good deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, like, everything that we've talked about, right, is still actually in effect today, in terms of you can still negotiate on just about
Hmm.
anything. You know, sellers have the option of offering nothing in commission. It's certainly possible. All of these things have already been there. It's just that the mandate for them is going to be going into effect. So I don't think there's any reason to wait. I don't think there's any concern about that. It's just more of market conditions and seeing how they play out in the next 6 months to a year.
Okay. Well, I like it. I know there's been a lot of news stories. So is there any note that you want to end on as far as what would be your big take home message from this that an investor should think about?
Yeah, I think the big thing is just to continue to follow the stories that are out there. Try to stick with reputable news sources. This is an easy one to kind of blow out of proportion. It's exciting. It affects everybody, right? Everybody's it
Hmm.
has to have a place to live, so it affects sort of everyone in the industry and beyond. And so definitely, keep your eye on this and see where things start to go. The big thing I think that I would be watching for is just how this starts to affect the pool of sellers and the pool of buyers moving forward, because that's how you're going to change market conditions, and that's what's going to be more telling in terms of prices and when to buy and things like that.
That makes good sense to me. Well, I appreciate you letting me text you over the weekend with like, what's going on? I need to know. And as well as letting me pepper you with questions here on the podcast today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, happy to do it. And again, if any of our audience has questions out there, again, I am by no means an expert on this, just one of many agents trying to navigate through it. But more than happy to have a discussion about things and see if there's something I can help with. Reach out to us on Facebook. You can find us on our website, yfprealestate.com. I'm on LinkedIn. You just reach out anytime.
Thanks for listening to the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. If you like what you heard in today's show, please leave us a review and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. If you have a question, know someone that would make a good guest, or want to connect with us, head on over to yfprealestate.com and join the growing YFP Real Estate Investing Facebook group.
As we conclude this week's episode of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast, an important reminder that the content of this podcast is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in this podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with their financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archive newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and therefore may not be accurate at the time you listen to it. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer.
Thank you for your support of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. Have a great rest of your week.